first and foremost, being a journalist means to find the facts. The Shinzo Abe assassination, the Seoul crowd crush, or the Noto earthquake. It's the story that engages people from all around the world and it gets them interested. And then, of course, on the other side of the spectrum, it's supposed to challenge authority. It's supposed to challenge power. When I first started, I thought all journalism changes the world. Now, it takes a lot to change society.
Hey there, and thank you for tuning in. We're excited to bring you another great conversation today. If you like the show and want to support us, please hit the subscribe button so we can keep bringing you great content week after week. And if you're feeling extra generous, give this video a like and share your thoughts and comments down below. Thank you so much. And now, let's get into it. Welcome to Unpacking Japan. I'm Toby, and today we welcome Hanako in the studio. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're an international correspondent for CNN, reporting here in Japan and sometimes also more broadly in Asia, I believe.
Yes.
So we're going to dive into the world of journalism and what's it like to report from Japan, but maybe a little bit to go back in time. What brought you here in the first place?
Very good question. So I actually studied abroad in Japan when I was in college, in undergrad, at Sophia University. And when I was at Sophia, I think I got my first ever real exposure to journalism. A few of my friends and I, we filmed a documentary about Japan's sex industry. Mm-hmm. And it was a full-length documentary. Looking back on it now, it's very cringe to watch my younger self kind of fumbling my way through this process. But it was such a phenomenal experience because I got to see a side of Japan that I hadn't seen before. You know, I would come back to Japan every summer as a kid. I spent a lot of time here with my family, but I was never exposed to that side of Japan. But through that documentary, I really understood this industry, this type of work. And from that moment, I knew that I wanted to create documentaries. I wanted to create stories. And that's when I first really understood I wanted to be a journalist as well. And growing up in the U.S., I love the U.S., of course. I'm an American, but I knew I wanted to be an international correspondent. I knew I wanted to be back in Asia, back in Japan, telling stories from here because I felt that I could offer something that most others couldn't. And I felt like there was a lot more work to be done, specifically in Asia.
So you're a student at Sophia University, and with your friends, you decide to make a documentary. And the first topic you pick is the sex industry in Japan.
Yes.
Why that topic?
Why that topic? I pitched that topic because I remember as a kid coming to Japan. Actually, it was a moment when I was in Osaka. I forget the name of the street, but I was just walking along with my family. And I remember seeing older women, you know, dolled up, standing outside of certain establishments. And I remember asking my parents, you know, who are these people? Mm-hmm. And they kind of, you know, avoided the question. They didn't really answer my question. And I remember just always being really curious about what that industry looked like. Okay. In high school, I was very much I loved feminism and I loved studying topics about women's rights and women's issues. And in the States, sex work is illegal. Right. But in Japan, there's a bit of a gray area.
A loophole.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I was fascinated also by this gray zone, you know, how it could be both illegal and legal at the same time, these loopholes that exist. And, you know, whether these loopholes allow better protection for the actual workers or if it doesn't, if it's exploitative. So I just had so many questions about it. And yeah, I pitched that story.
But when you're a student, this is kind of an area, if you want to interview people, if you want to get access to that world, it's difficult because it's in this gray zone where people may be like, what are you doing here? Mm. How do you go on about making such a documentary when you're a student and you don't have, let's say, CNN credentials that may give you more access to talk to certain people?
Yeah, it was a lot of field work. So my friends and I, we would just go to Kabukicho, which is a red light district in Tokyo. And we would just kind of go to these different stores, these Muryo Annaijo, which are, I suppose, establishments that offer different types of sex services to customers. And we would just kind of ask if we could ask questions. And we would also go to, was the name of that place? We would go to Fujiwara, Yoshiwara. So we would also go to Yoshiwara, which is an area of Tokyo that historically a lot of bathhouses
I see.
existed. Yeah, so it was, sex work, but specifically in the form of bathhouses. Mm-hmm. So my friend and I, we would just go around Yoshiwara with our camera, also hidden cameras, try to find anybody who could maybe talk. We found one construction worker who answered some of our questions. There was also, I suppose, a not so smart thing that we did that was a bit dangerous, where we were in Ueno, and which is another, of course, red light district, mm-hmm. sort of. And I knew that there were kyakuhiki, or just sort of, I suppose, pimps on the street who would give customers sort of some information about which store to go to. And I had the not so bright idea of going up to one of them and pretending that we were looking for work.
that is quite the risk you're taking there.
Yes, yeah. So he said, "Oh, okay, if you guys are interested in work, I can interview you." And he took us to the separate room in a building, and then we went in, and then that's kind of where we revealed, actually, we're not interested in work. We just wanted to ask you questions because we're filming a documentary. And I think that kind of took him by surprise, but he was actually really helpful, and he answered our questions.
Interesting.
He gave us a lot of insight as to how the industry works. Again, not something that I would recommend to other people, but
you said, looking back, that documentary is a little cringe, but can we still see it somewhere?
Yes, most likely on YouTube.
Okay,
yes,
we'll have to go look for this. But that experience kind of gave you the confirmation that you want to become an international correspondent. You want to come back to Japan when you graduate. And I think you got your proper start in journalism as a professional journalist with NHK.
Correct.
How did that happen?
Yeah, NHK. Oh gosh, it was actually through an old teacher of mine. I went to Japanese school every Saturday growing up. And one of the teachers I had was a former actress at Takarazuka, so a theater school.
Here, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And she had moved to moved to the States, I think a couple of decades ago. Mm-hmm. And she taught at my Japanese school part-time. She would teach us how to wear kimono properly or hakama properly. And she has a lot of connections in the arts world in New York. And she was actually the one who, I suppose, saw that I was interested in journalism and in TV reporting. And she said, Hanako, if you have any interest, there's actually an opening at TV Japan. And you can go in for an interview, go in for an audition. So I think it was 2019. I had just finished my year abroad at Sophia. I came back to New York and I went in for an audition. And I suppose I got the part.
Interesting. So it's not an interview, it's more like an audition?
Yeah. I say the word audition because it was me in a green room reading some lines in Japanese. And I had maybe about 6 executives watching me. And then we went to a conference room, and that's where they sort of interviewed me properly. But it was more of it was a screening. It was a screen test.
So this was for the role of also reporter?
Yes. So the initial interview was for a position as a newscaster, an announcer. And I definitely did not have enough experience. So they said, okay, maybe not announcer, but reporter. So that's where I sort of, I suppose, cut my teeth.
Mm-hmm. So reporter is basically the person on the ground.
Correct.
That the announcer will kind of turn to when they need something on location.
Yes. Yeah. So the announcer is the one in the studio asking questions to the reporter, summarizing maybe live hits. And then as a reporter, I would go to these different locations and interview people there and put together a story with my producers.
Is this then something that you choose, okay, I want to go to this area, make a story about that? Or do you get a list of stories assigned and you have to go through each of them, like one per month?
So when I was at NHK, we would come up with different pitches together. So sometimes I would pitch a story. Most times, though, my producers would pitch stories and I would help with maybe research. But it really depends on, I guess, the organization.
You mentioned producers. How does the team structure work? You're the reporter, so you're the face of the story and you kind of share it and tell it in your way. Who else is behind and helps to kind of put this all together?
Yeah, so at NHK, you mean?
Yes.
So at NHK, it was 2 producers, and we were working for this weekly show. It was a Friday show, a 15-minute show. And the producers and I would do a lot of research together. We would come up with different story ideas. We would also try to find different interviewees, maybe reach out to these people. And then we would go to the location after confirming what the story was with our cameraman. And then we would film a story, and then they would actually script it. And then I would voice the script, and then that piece would air.
So you'd research first, go on location and film,
Yes.
and then after that you write the script to kind of match with the footage.
Exactly. Yes, and match what you get from the interview. So, I think most times when you're about to film a story, you kind of have a general idea of what you're looking for, right? You kind of have a sense of what the story will be, but really it also depends on the interviews that you get and the context that you're filming in and what kind of amazing pictures you get, right? That can also kind of determine the nuances of a given story.
Do you remember your first story?
First story. Oh, I do actually. Yeah. It was about, so I worked at NHK during COVID, and my first ever on-air package was about a restaurant in Japan, a Japanese restaurant in New York that just opened up again. And it was about how they implemented different COVID-19 measures and how they were practicing social distancing while also providing really good food to their customers. That was my first story.
Interesting.
Yeah, very COVID-19 story.
It must be a big difference when you go on location to film something and you do the voiceover compared to when you turn to live on air, right? When they are kind of making a live news report, the 8 o'clock journal or something like that, and suddenly it's up to you.
Yes.
Is this
very different.
With the teleprompter? Is this also scripted and you kind of read off something, or do you have to prepare lines, or do you just improvise?
So when I was at NHK, because I was only a reporter for a weekly show, I never did live reporting. I only really started doing live reporting in 2023 when I was freelancing for Al Jazeera, and then of course also now with CNN. And for my live reports, they are unscripted, so I don't have a teleprompter. If I have some time to prepare, then I might come up with a list of things that I want to say, a list of facts, maybe some quotes. But sometimes in a breaking news environment, you have no idea, right? Because the story is happening as you're speaking. So in those moments, it's just pulling different context from different parts of my brain and making sure that I somehow make sense.
That there's some kind of structure and some kind of information, then it's like back to you in the studio.
Exactly.
And then you can breathe again.
Exactly, yes. But it really is a team effort. I might be the one answering the questions live on air, but if I didn't get the information from my colleagues who are doing the news gathering, who are confirming the facts for me, then I wouldn't have anything to say. I would just stare at the anchor.
The project that got you into journalism was about sex work.
Yes.
And one of your big breakthrough projects was about, I think, legal child abuse in manga.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that story and kind of how this got started and unfolded?
Yeah. So that piece actually started with a written article. The Japanese Communist Party had recently said that they wanted to ban that material. And that angered a lot of fans of this manga because traditionally the Japanese Communist Party has been really an advocate of free speech. And this manga currently in Japan is protected under this right to free speech, right? It's considered a form of expression, a form of speech, so it should be protected. But when the Japanese Communist Party shifted their position, again, it angered a lot of individuals. So initially, I just covered it as a written piece.
Okay.
But then one of my producers back in New York was really interested in the story and said, hey, maybe this could be a TV piece. Maybe this could be a documentary style piece. So then I said, okay, let me do some research. Let me do some digging. And I found a few people who could speak on camera, who were willing to speak. Of course, it took so much research and so much time to develop that story because of how sensitive it was and also how difficult it is to find people who want to speak about that subject. But yeah, then we started reaching out, started filming, and then we went, of course, into edit, and then it aired in 2022. Yeah, so it took about a year.
So a year of research, outreach, gathering all the little pieces together. It's a very sensitive topic. What happens the moment you put it out? Do you suddenly get flooded with phone calls of angry fans of the manga, or do you get a lot of people that suddenly want to also come out and talk about this? And
it was a mixed reaction for sure. We had some people who would reach out and say, actually, I myself am, and I became interested in children, or I was sexually interested in children in part because of this manga. So I had people reaching out to me who had a very similar experience to the actual convicted we interviewed for the piece. And then I also had some politicians reaching out saying, thank you for shedding light on this issue. It's an issue related to child rights, and we want to provide better protection. And then, of course, on the other side of the spectrum, I had a lot of haters who would say that this was a smear campaign against Japanese culture, that I wasn't a real journalist. And then, of course, I think you often hear now, especially when you're covering a sensitive issue, but I was also, targeted online, meaning I would get some death threats and also some just photos actually DM'd to me of child sort of as a way to rile me up. But yeah, very mixed reaction.
How do you deal with that?
Lots of consultations with my legal team, of course, for sure, and making sure that I don't react immediately. I think when you are going through a difficult moment, you tend to want to emotionally react. Maybe you want to go on Twitter or on X and say, oh no, this isn't me, or, I've been receiving death threats, please stop. But actually the best way to deal with that kind of hate is to disengage. And then of course also to protect all of my accounts. So, having to do double security with my accounts and just making sure that I'm protecting myself. And also my family as well. I never got to that extent where I had people coming over to my house or sending letters or death threats to my home, but it is, of course, a concern because when you're a journalist reporting the story, you sometimes, I find anyway, that you forget about the impact it has on your personal relations and how your family members might be affected by your work too.
For that work, you also had to make some very difficult interviews. You mentioned interviews with...
Yeah.
As a journalist, you want to convey the story and show the full picture. But how is it for you as a person to sit in front of a that is admitting to this and kind of have a conversation?
Yeah, it's a tough conversation to have for sure. It's tough because I think, you grow up in a society where you're told that children should be protected, that they shouldn't be sexually abused, that where we have an age of consent, right? And, here this individual was sitting in front of me admitting to all of his past actions and to that past abuse. But something that actually really stood out to me in that interview was just how willing he was to speak. He actually allowed us to show his face. He allowed us to share his real name. And he was actually really cooperative throughout the whole piece because he had done, I suppose, the work on himself, on his own identity, to understand that manga encouraged him to have certain sexual habits. And he wanted to express that to the rest of the world, to say, hey, this manga for me was harmful. So that's actually what really stood out to me, just how willing he was to admit something that most people, I think, would never, ever admit. And he was just doing it wholeheartedly. He was very, very honest, which is something that I respected. So again, it was interesting for me as a journalist because, you're speaking to people who are sort of labeled in society as bad, as criminals. And here he was showing me the respect of being honest. And you don't always get that. You can interview a politician and they might tell you a bunch of lies, but here he was, telling me how he truly honestly felt. And that's something that I really respected and I really honored and am appreciative of.
For you as a journalist, you spend 1 year making the research, preparing for those interviews, putting this all together, and you put the piece out, is your job then done and it's up to lawmakers, up to the public, up to other people to pick up from there, because something has to happen from that story, right? You don't just put it out there and expect no reaction. Do you consider your job done, or do you feel like, okay, now I need to make a follow-up, I need to kind of do something after this?
So I think definitely when I first started in my career, I thought all journalism changes the world. And I had this very naive assumption that once you put out a story, then, people would discuss it and laws would be changed, and, real change could happen and real improvements could happen in society. Now, I am not as naive. The more cynical side of me recognizes that it takes a lot of work actually to change laws and to change society. So I think when I put out a piece, I don't necessarily think that the job is done. I think it does achieve that very first important step of raising awareness, of getting people to discuss, to engage. And sometimes that alone can be a change-making opportunity. It can be a change-making thing. But I think also follow-ups, of course, are very, very important, especially if you're reporting on a story that is still happening, right? I think a great example about a story that I haven't personally covered, but many of my colleagues at CNN have, is just the war in Gaza right now and the current political climate, the humanitarian crisis happening. And that story, of course, is one that can't just be told in one iteration. It has to be told in various different ways and various different perspectives, and kind of following through on that and making sure that we are covering that story diligently is a way to create change. But to answer your question, sorry, about the child in manga, I would have loved to do a follow-up story. I did get laid off from Vice quite soon after that piece aired. So, maybe it's something to explore at CNN.
In the current state of things, the role of a journalist has evolved. In the past, they were the people that had access to information would share it with people that don't have access to information. Nowadays, a lot of people are on social media. The 24-hour news cycle is ongoing, and there are more news outlets than ever before. What does it mean for you to be a journalist today?
That's a great question. I think first and foremost, being a journalist means to find the facts and to report the facts. I think it's wonderful that there are lots of different content creators that, tell stories about the news or, report on the news. But oftentimes, what I find anyway, in my algorithm is content creators who actually take information from journalists, facts that have been reported by CNN, by NBC, by NHK. They repackage it in a way that's very interesting to a young audience, and it engages them with that content creator. But they didn't necessarily do the reporting on the ground. So I still think that traditional media, established media organizations have that really diligent fact-checking process that is absolutely essential when you're trying to understand a given problem in the world. There is so much noise and so much fake news right now. It's kind of wild, and it can be really frustrating as a journalist because you're interviewing people who simply believe something that does not exist, right? But I think the role as journalist has not changed. It's to report the facts, it's to find the facts and tell it to people. And of course, how we're doing it has changed significantly, but that is our main role still to this day, I think, and to hold power to account, of course.
Do you feel that those responsibilities and those processes to find the facts, to hold power to account are different in the way journalism is done in the United States and journalism is done here in Japan?
Yes, for sure. I think, even with the current US President Donald Trump, right, we're seeing a massive shift in how journalists can cover the White House, right? It's a moment in our history, I think our modern history, that has been really significant and has really changed some people's careers. It's changed, I think, also some people's understanding of news, right? One of my colleagues did a really great piece about the manga reporters you see now in the White House, right? And, you have, again, content creators or perhaps YouTubers who have news channels And again, most of those channels don't have a fact-checking system in place. In Japan, I think you still get that. You still do have YouTubers who have one specific platform, they have one opinion, and they create a lot of content based on that perspective. But in Japan, I think perhaps you see it to a lesser scale, because I do think that traditional media has a lot more power in Japan than at least in the United States. I think maybe Japan is catching up to the US, but it's not quite there yet.
It has a lot more power and presence. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that Japan is a country that has still the highest rate of newspaper readership in the world. But Japan also has Kisha Club, so the newspaper clubs or the journalist clubs that get fed information from the government, for example. Is it then in a way less free, or information is more controlled than in the United States, where people go knocking on doors, where people go push in a traditional context, push the president for answer, push or try to hold people accountable. But in Japan, it's more like, here's the information you get for today, you can write an article about it.
Yeah. It's Kisha Club. It's been my career in Japan has always come back to Kisha Club, because I think it's really fascinating. You know, you don't have that really in the United States, at least not in that way, right? And it very much does determine what information you can report. And you can find often, right, you bring a Japanese newspaper from different organizations, right? So you have 5 Japanese newspapers laid out, and it will sound the same, right? Because the information is the same. And, you know, fortunately, unfortunately, because I've worked for international organizations, I haven't really needed to be part of a Kisha Club, because we don't necessarily cover the day-to-day experiences or the day-to-day stories. While I was at Vice, actually, when I was doing a lot more online article writing, I did have to, of course, call the cops and call different government organizations, and always they would ask, "Are you part of the Kisha Club?" And it's tough, because, you know, you're trying to ask a question, you're trying to report this information for your audience, but your membership in a Kisha Club determines whether or not you get that information. I do also hear from my Japanese colleagues, people who report at other organizations, about how, you know, that relationship you have within the Kisha Club is quite delicate, right? You don't want to step on any toes, because that could determine your access to that information.
You lose credentials very quickly.
Exactly, yes, which is a nightmare, right? As a journalist, you want those credentials, you want that access. But then at the same time, that means you're censoring yourself. So I do think if Kisha Club were more open and it allowed journalists to be members, right, who weren't necessarily members of a Japanese news organization, right? They allowed international news members, or also if they provided information that you asked for, not just information that they want to provide, it would definitely make for a different media landscape that's much more free.
One thing that is interesting that I noticed is, as you said, those main newspapers will all have very similar stories. However, then there's all the tabloids, and they will have more of this. They will try to dig and look for what happens behind it. But technically, they're tabloids. They're looking for drama, and yet they are often the ones that uncover the scandals in the first place, that then get kind of reported by the main newspapers. Yeah. It's interesting, because in the United States, as a journalist, you would be the one to do the research first, not tabloids.
It is, I mean, even the Johnny Kitagawa scandal, right? Bunshun, which is a huge tabloid in Japan, I believe, covered the story first, and for many, many years. And nothing changed, right? I mean, it was completely disregarded until after Kitagawa-san died. Yeah.
Your story about child abuse, I think, won an Emmy.
Yes.
How does that change your career as a journalist?
How does it change my career as a journalist? To say not much is a bit offensive, I think, but I mean not much in the sense that I don't think my job is really done, right? It's wonderful to be recognized for that work. I'm very honored that we received an accolade for that piece of work, because it was, you know, it's kind of a nod to just how much time and effort we put into that piece. And it's nice to be recognized. But there is so much more work to be done that for me, and maybe this is just my personality, but I just think, okay, well, where's the next one? What's the next story? How can I keep producing? How can I keep writing? So it's, of course, a nod from my industry. It's a nod from my colleagues. But in terms of, actual change, I think there's a lot more to be done.
So that led you later to kind of continue your career at CNN, where you're working at now.
Yes.
How did that come to be, and how is it like now working for one of the I would say, biggest news providers in the United States?
Yeah. So actually, I met CNN through a convention, a journalism convention in 2023. So I had just been laid off by my former employer, Vice, and I went to a convention for Asian American journalists to make connections, to, kind of put my foot in the door again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I actually met a few people from CNN. And that's when I started having conversations, and that's when the ball started rolling, and I was doing a bunch of different interviews. And then actually I won the Emmy. So the conversations with CNN started before the Emmy. Yes. Yeah. But it's, sometimes I do have to pinch myself still. I worked at CNN for over a year, and, I definitely struggled with imposter syndrome when I first started, because most of my colleagues who are in the same role as me, international correspondent, they're much older and they have a lot more experience. They have a lot of expertise. And, here I was someone who had maybe less than 5 years of experience in the same role. And it was quite intimidating. And I definitely second guessed myself a lot. But I also had to remind myself, my managers knew how old I was. They knew how much experience I had when they hired me. It's not like I lied, right? So I must be here for a reason. And they must see something in me that maybe I don't quite grasp or I don't quite see yet. And that's something that I can't let down. But, working with CNN, working in Tokyo especially, it's just been such a privilege. It really has. It's crazy because sometimes, I wake up in the morning just so excited to go to work. Or sometimes, I'll wake up in the middle of the night thinking of different stories. And it really is a privilege to be a journalist. Yeah.
How different is your role now compared to what you used to do before?
Very different. Very different. I think at Vice, I wore many hats. Yeah. I was a digital writer. I was a producer. I was an on-air journalist, and I would also translate, right? We were a bit more bare-boned in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, I had to wear, again, a lot of hats and do a lot of different roles. Now at CNN, because we're such a large company and we have so much assistance and so much help, it's, in a funny kind of way, easier, but also harder, right? So now I have 2 producers, I have a cameraman, we have editors who help me with the piece. We have different seniors who advise me about storytelling and, how the script is going. And it's such a big, robust team. But it is, of course, more difficult, I think, because I'm on a larger stage now. What I say matters more. It's watched more.
Yeah.
Yes, it's watched more. Yeah.
Do you still choose some stories, or are they all assigned now?
No. So with CNN and with Vice as well, and I think this is also actually a difference maybe between Japanese media and American media, but I pitch most of my stories. Sometimes a senior will say, oh, hey, this is an interesting story. Do you want to maybe cover that? And they will pitch something to me, and then I'll say, oh, yeah, actually, that's kind of cool. Let's do that. Or say, maybe not one for us. But I have a lot of editorial freedom in terms of what I'm pitching. Of course, we still have seniors who determine what will go to air and what we'll pursue. But in terms of pitching, I have a lot of freedom. And I did at Vice as well.
One of the big stories you covered as well was, I think, the Noto earthquake.
Yes.
And I think you introduced this story also as the first time for you being in a disaster zone shortly after it happened. So that was, I think, January 1st, 2024.
Yes.
In the Noto Peninsula. I imagine January 1st, you may be home with friends or celebrating the New Year's. And what happens then?
Yeah, actually, my experience covering the earthquake started from the night before on December 31st. We have a New Year's show that we do. And my team and I were doing that New Year's show until maybe 3 a.m., 4 a.m.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow.
And it's a fantastic show. It's a countdown. Within, I think that year we were in Shinjuku, and it was beautiful. But yeah, we finished work at 3 or 4 a.m. We go home, and I have some family in Japan. So I went to my grandfather's house on January 1st to celebrate the New Year with my family. And I think it was around 4 p.m., a little after 4, when the earthquake hit. And we just so happened to be watching TV at that time. And of course, the NHK announcer comes on, warning of that earthquake, warning of that tsunami. We actually felt the earthquake a little bit as well. And, when it first happened, I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be a big one. This is going to be huge. And sure enough, I get a call from one of my producers saying, okay, you need to come in immediately. You have to come in right now. So I packed my bags, I left my grandfather's house. I got on a train because January 1st, it's impossible to find a taxi, right?
All used.
And then, yes, a lot of people are also drinking because it's a holiday, right? So I get on the train. I think I have to get off the train maybe twice because the shows wanted me to call in on a beeper. So sometimes when you can't get in front of a camera, they'll ask you to call in on a phone, right?
Oh,
on
I
a
see.
beeper. Yeah. So my voice is on the show. So I did that twice from random public bathrooms and train stations. And then I got to our building and, I had to run up the stairs basically and then sit in front of that camera. And then we did live coverage for maybe 10 hours. And then around 2 a.m., I think I went down for about 4 or 5 hours. I got about 4 or 5 hours, woke up, packed, and then left for Noto. Yeah.
And then you arrive there and all the buildings are in shambles and you can't even access it, right? You probably have to get off the train like much further and find your way through.
We actually drove. We drove there. We hired a driver because, the Shinkansen, the bullet trains weren't running. Mm-hmm. The airports were closed. So the only way we could go was to drive. And it took forever to actually get to Noto as well because there's so much traffic, right? People trying to go in, also people trying to come out. It took, oh my gosh, so long to get there. But yeah, once we got there, it was, a very, very tragic sight, right? It's like you said, houses in shambles, people sleeping on floors. And again, it's January 2nd at this point. So it's really, really cold. Mm-hmm. And Noto is a bit farther north than Tokyo. So it's freezing, right? And you have these people in sleeping bags. They've just lost their homes. Maybe they've also lost their family members. And they're just trying to get through that night. But again, it was really a moment of clarity for me as a journalist because people, again, were so willing to speak about their experience. And they were so kind as well. We'd get there, we'd interview them and they'd say, oh, are you okay? Are you sleeping at a hotel? Like, where are you going home after this? And it's just amazing. Yeah.
How do you switch from making a countdown live report with your colleagues in Shinjuku to going to have lunch with your grandfather to suddenly being in an earthquake zone with everything destroyed within like 48 hours?
I think the stress helps for sure. When you're under pressure like that, you kind of don't have any time to think about how you're feeling, right? You don't have much time to think about how to transition from one story to another. You just kind of do it. I think also for me, it does help in that sense because sometimes, when you're covering a really tough story, you can get quite emotional, right? And you can get quite sad about what you're seeing, about the stories you're hearing. But when you're under that kind of pressure for time, for editorial, right? You're trying to get information to your colleagues, information out to your audience. That can kind of come second. And it actually helps as a journalist because you are allowed some breathing room, right? You're not that close to the story. You can kind of take a step back and report the facts, and in a balanced way.
How do you approach people that just lost everything and you're here temporarily, you get to leave after, and you're asking them questions about how they feel, how they look at behind them where there used to be their house, and do you have kind of, okay, I'm going to ask these and these questions, but I don't go this far, kind of rules for yourself? Or do you have any kind of goals where it's like you need to get this kind of answer for your story?
That's a great question. I love that question. I think when you're speaking to someone who has just gone through a really, really horrible moment, you never ask them how they're feeling because they're probably feeling pretty bad, right? But I try to ask questions that are a little bit more concrete, right? Like, how long were you living in that home? Were you a pillar of your community? You know, are you going to move somewhere else, right? And you can kind of tell a story through those facts because you kind of get a sense of who they are, maybe their family structure, right? Maybe how intimately close they were to that area. And also what I do make sure of doing, right, is every time I'm about to interview someone who's been in a tough situation, just to kind of get on their level, if that makes sense. I think sometimes working in traditional media, right, you have like the suits and you have the ties and you look very formal. But just to kind of, drop an octave, look at them eye to eye and just say, I'm so sorry for what you've just experienced. I know this is a tough interview to do. And I'm just really, really grateful that you're speaking to us because I think the world deserves to know what's just happened to you. So being honest in that sense, I think does help it helps people open up.
If you interview multiple people, some of them may have a breakdown throughout the conversation. Do you then decide to, okay, let's not put them on international television and we will just discard this interview and maybe just reference to it as part of the report, but keep their privacy? Or how do you decide kind of what goes in and what doesn't in the report?
It's actually up to the interviewees most of the time, because if they, for instance, have done an interview and they feel really emotional, right? And they say, actually, I feel really uncomfortable. I don't want people to know about this. Then we can't, right? We'll say, of course, we'll respect your privacy, we'll respect your boundaries, and we won't air it. But if they're still okay with it, then we will choose to air. And I think one of the huge reasons for that is because with storytelling, at least for us at CNN, it's, of course, facts first. Facts are very important, but it's also about how you make the audience feel, right? It's the story that engages people from all around the world, and it gets them interested in an earthquake that happened on the other side of the world. So, when people are vulnerable and they open up to you and, they might be crying, they might be heartbroken, but they still want people to see that. I think it's really our job to show that as well.
These are stories you covered in Japan. I believe you also covered the stampede at the Halloween night in Seoul, where I think a few hundred people died. I don't think you speak Korean. How do you report on an event like this when suddenly you have a language barrier? When you can't actually ask the people on the street what they just went through and what is happening, and maybe also just to ask authorities to kind of get information from them, but you don't have the language.
Yeah. So language, of course, is hugely important. And I think I have an advantage in Japan because I do speak Japanese, and it creates this very immediate and intimate relationship with your interviewee because they can look at you, they can answer your questions. If they don't understand something, they can just ask you. But like you said, right, when we're sent to locations where we don't speak the local language, it can be more tough, right? You don't have that immediate, intimate connection. But that's actually where a lot of our local producers come in. So every time I'm on location where I don't speak the language, I will always have a producer or a local fixer who is able to speak the local language, and they will be translating. So it's kind of it's not a simultaneous translation most of the time. It's a very immediate, right? They'll just translate what that person was saying, and then I'll ask a follow-up question and have that back and forth. But they are so critical in those situations, for sure.
You said about the Noto earthquake that one of your goals is to maybe get people that are on the other side of the world interested in this issue that just happened. Nowadays, with so much information pouring in, do you think it's, this is maybe a far-fetched question, but necessary from people from all around the world to know all the problems that are happening on other sides of the world when there are already so many problems maybe at home?
That is a good question. I think it's very important to know what's happening in the world. I think when you have this perspective that is more insular and inward-looking, I think sometimes you don't get a fresh perspective. One of the reasons why I'm a journalist in Japan and in Asia specifically is because I think there's so much to learn about Asia. And I think there's so much that Americans can learn about Asia, right? The way we do things, the way we run our societies, the way we create our laws, rules, whatever, you name it. There's so much to learn from each other. And I think when that's put aside just to simply address issues at home or, kind of have, again, that more insular perspective, it can be, I don't want to say dangerous, but it can be, what's the word I'm looking for? It can be...
You cut yourself off from the rest. You kind of narrow your field of view a little bit.
Yeah, you also, it's just, I think, I think it just doesn't allow for a diverse perspective. It doesn't allow for diverse opinions. I think one of the best ways that we as a world can create laws that help people and protect more people is to get a diverse perspective from many, many different actors. And when you're only getting one narrative or one, I suppose, story within your own country, then you don't have as many diverse opinions. Does it happen a lot? Yes, for sure. But I truly do believe there is a lot of value in learning how things are done outside of your own country.
So you've reported on sex industry in Japan with your documentary. You've done the child abuse. You've done earthquakes, stampedes. You also reported on the assassination of Shinzo Abe, the Tokyo Olympics.
Yeah.
The topics are so diverse. Is there like a common thread in how you approach reporting on such diverse topics, a sort of methodology you follow? Or do you need to kind of change your reporting depending on what you're reporting on?
Yeah. So when a story has just happened and it's a breaking news story, the first thing we have to do is just to cover the facts. Who, what, when, where, why, right? What's happening? And then when you have a little bit more breathing room, what I like to do is report something that's surprising or something that most other people don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't really like to do stories that have already been done before because I think it just adds to the noise. I think it limits our creative freedom. I think it's not a good habit. But when you're doing something new and you are challenging things that have already been established, I think that's when the audience gets really engaged. And I also think that's when more interesting conversations happen. So my methodology is definitely to cover the facts first. And then when you have more breathing room to do that day two story, to do that story that people haven't heard of. But again, also this does definitely depend on what you're covering. So for instance, the Shinzo Abe assassination or the Seoul crowd crush or the Noto earthquake, right? That's a perfect example of doing the facts first and then doing what's surprising. For instance, the child abuse material in a manga, that isn't a breaking news story. So that is, I think, a good example of doing a story that hasn't really been done before in that way. So it does, I think, take a little bit of flexibility in terms of how you approach a story.
Most of the stories we've talked about so far are, for lack of a better word, kind of like sad, negative, tragic. But you also report on more uplifting stories. I think one of the recent one you've done is about the children in Wakayama.
Oh, yes.
And I think a lot of people had questions about whether that kid finally got his curry udon.
At home, maybe, yeah. At home.
So is this part of these stories that you kind of are not done and you kind of go and do your research more of a investigative journalism, so to say, where you try to provide more context and more information, not just report on facts?
Yeah, I think It's funny you say that because I definitely pitch a lot of sad stories. And those are my favorite. I think when you're telling a story that, hasn't been really done before or needs to be told, or, it's supposed to instigate some kind of change, it does tend to be sad. But at the same time, of course, Japan has such a plethora of positive, uplifting, beautiful stories. And yes, that preschool story is a perfect example. That story was actually pitched to me. Okay. So I didn't pitch that one, which might check out given my track record. But yeah, the Wakayama story, I think, is a very good example of something that's happening in Japan, uniquely Japanese, that other people around the world can learn about and can learn from. And it's I think, a good example of storytelling where you, yes, feel pleased or uplifted after watching it because the children are so adorable.
Do you notice a difference when you go around and do your research and you introduce yourself as a journalist here in Japan as opposed to in the United States?
I think in the US, CNN still has a pretty big brand name. And I think most people know what CNN is. In Japan, I think 9 times, maybe 8 times out of 10 people know what CNN is. But the remaining 10, 20% don't.
I believe CNN even has a cnn.co.jp site, which is all in Japanese.
Indeed.
Right? Yeah.
Yes, it does. Yeah. But I think it's just because, for instance, NHK, TV Asahi, you have so many other Japanese outlets that are much, much bigger and have a bigger platform. So CNN, I think, our footprint might not be as big in comparison. But I think, what a journalist is or what a TV correspondent is differs very significantly if you're talking about Japan or you're talking about the US. Mm-hmm. So in the US, right, we're expected to write our own scripts. We're expected to do our own digging. We have to be really good writers first and foremost. In Japan, if you are a TV reporter, sometimes you don't even write your own script. You have those scripts written for you. Sometimes, the questions that you can ask are predetermined by a producer or a show executive. So I think sometimes when I say I'm a reporter here in Japan, they might assume that I'm a reporter on Japanese television mm-hmm. who does a lot of stuff about food or, is a bit, does a lot of fashion pieces. You know what I mean? But it's very much not what my job is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's tricky. The perception of the role of journalists and how this kind of comes across, especially in Japan and other countries.
For sure.
Back in the days, I think a lot of newspapers were kind of competing for who gets the first breaking news headlines and so on. Is it still the case nowadays, or do you feel that now as a journalist, the priority is just communicating the facts, just having the story right?
I think it's actually a mix of both. Yeah, for sure. It's, at CNN, we're known for breaking news. So we still very much prioritize getting the story out first, right? But a story is not worth getting out if it's incorrect and inaccurate. So, it's a balance of trying to get the facts down right. It's a balance of getting the story out first before your competitors. But also, I do think something that's interesting that's happening in my industry right now is we have to find a way also to get young people interested in the news again, right? And that might not necessarily be breaking news updates. It might be more enterprise pieces or bigger society pieces about a given social issue in Japan, in Korea, or in elsewhere, to create content that, you might not see every single day, but it's done in a unique and fascinating way. And I think that's kind of how you get more people interested in your content as well.
Earlier, you brought up a little bit the topic of fake news, something that news outlets and CNN have to battle nowadays. What do you think people get wrong about journalism?
What do people get wrong about journalism?
The image has changed, I think, over the last few years, especially with a constant reminder of fake news. What is real, what is not, and what do the journalists actually do? You mentioned the fact-checking process.
Yeah.
Is this a public process? Can people know somehow, okay, how does CNN check their facts and kind of get them right before they put them out?
So I think what people often get wrong about journalists, from my perspective, is we are assumed to be content creators, I think, for a bigger news outlet. I've had, some people come up to me asking for career advice, saying, what I really want to do is review food spots and restaurants, and I want to also travel and cover that for a given outlet. Of course, we do have a travel desk and we have an entertainment desk, etc. But I think with journalism, first and foremost, it's supposed to, again, challenge authority. It's supposed to challenge power. It's supposed to provide people with information that is supposed to help the world. At least in my book, that's what journalism is. Report something that hasn't been reported on before. So I think that is a common misconception that people have. I think also, with journalism, again, when you have content creators who don't have as rigorous a fact-checking system, they might report a piece of news that can't be confirmed, or it's just an assumption, or it's accusations, right? But things that haven't really been confirmed yet. But with CNN and with every other outlet, you, again, don't report until you can confirm those facts. So sometimes, I've heard people criticize outlets for being too slow to report the facts. It's like, we see all of this stuff on social media. Why isn't this outlet reporting it yet? But the reason why is because you can't just say, oh, a shooting has happened, right? First, you have to identify, what was that sound, right? We heard a loud bang, but we don't know where it came from, right? So there's so many different steps to confirming a fact that I just don't think people see much with media content creators.
Is this perhaps also a challenge then for CNN to maybe get a younger audience? I think, or not only CNN, just in general. One of the comments I see regularly in, let's say, the comment section of any social media post from a news outlet is, call it by what it really is. So what I mean by that is there will be a controversial topic being discussed, and the news outlet will have to report on it with the facts that they have. So let's say something controversial. You brought up the conflict in Gaza. People call it a genocide. It's not often talked about as a genocide in news outlets because I guess there is a specific definition behind it, and you can't use it as a news outlet unless, I don't know, some kind of person approves you can use this word. But that this basically struggles to gain over the readership, to convince the people, because you have to be more soft sometimes in the choice of word.
I think it really does depend on the outlet, right? And how you're doing fact checking. I can't speak for CNN because I can't provide that information publicly. But I do think, those comments about calling it by it is, or calling it by what it is, or, providing that information in a way that most people believe, right? I think it's extremely valid, right? You need to have that audience feedback telling you, oh, we're unhappy with coverage in this way and that way. And news organizations can grow from that. But I would say that for sure, as a journalist, we have to kind of err on the side of caution. Because again, you can't run with a fact that hasn't been confirmed, right?
Do big outlets like CNN actually have teams in place that will kind of monitor the entire comment section of social media to see what is the feedback from people? What are the things they criticize?
I'm not sure,
Maybe
sure.
they do, maybe they don't. A lot of comments, a lot of them probably also valid to be discarded. You've covered so many stories. You go all over Japan, sometimes Asia. Do you have a typical day, a typical week, or is it just you sitting there and suddenly you get a phone call and you have to...
Yeah, well, I think it does depend on the week, for sure. I think, especially since working for CNN, we're a 24-hour news channel. So a story can happen anytime, anywhere, and you just have to be ready. But I would say, it can be a bit tough. It can be a bit stressful. But also you have some days or some weeks where it's a bit quieter, right? And you're allowed to work on more investigative pieces or pieces that take more time. But it's really like two sides of the same coin, or it's just completely not two sides of the same coin, but it's a totally different experience. And you kind of don't know what you're getting until that day, but you kind of somehow have to make it work. Like, for example, we were in Osaka in April to cover the expo for the first time. And as we were leaving Osaka, right, we were about to get on the bullet train, the Myanmar earthquake happened. Yeah. And we didn't have many correspondents at the time. I think a few of us were on paid leave. So they asked if I could cover it. And so we had to immediately get off the bullet train, set up shop outside Osaka Station, and just do lives about the earthquake in Myanmar.
In front of Osaka Station.
In front of Osaka Station, yes. Yeah. And you just have to be ready. You're put on the spot. You have the facts in front of you. So you have to be able to relay them to the audience in an accurate way. And it's just, you have to turn on a dime, but that's part of the job. Yeah.
What got you into all of this journalism was a story you picked. Looking ahead, what are the stories you would like to still work on if you could?
I think what got me into journalism at the very beginning of my career was for sure my experiences at Sophia University and producing a documentary about the sex industry. I think also, I've always loved to write. In high school, I used to think I wanted to be a playwright. And I mean, that dream, I put that aside very quickly. But I think also I just had a lot of exposure to human rights stories growing up. I went to an international baccalaureate, middle school and high school. And one of the classes we had was about human rights, which I don't think you often hear, at least in the New York public education system. And that class really exposed me to so many different wars and crises that were happening around the world. And I knew from that moment, I guess, that I really wanted to work in a space that told stories that also covered disasters and raw human emotion. So yeah, I would say it's those two experiences for sure.
And so now human rights is kind of the direction you want to keep going with, looking ahead.
Yes. So looking ahead, yes. I definitely want to cover stories related to human rights. I think, that can be told in a number of different ways, right? It's a human rights story with an economy angle. It's a human rights story with a political angle, right? It's many different ways, but it's just, for me personally, that's what drives my passion. It's what helps me infer my decisions, and it's really what motivates me.
So I guess we will be seeing a lot more stories from you in the near future. Maybe by the time this episode is out, we will see another one about Osaka Expo, for which I believe
correct.
You're here.
Yes.
And who knows what kind of emergency you'll be called to in the near future.
Yes. Yeah. Hopefully, it's a funny thing, because even though I like to cover those types of stories, you never want the disaster to actually happen. Yeah. So it's a
But we also need reporters to share the facts.
That is true.
When they do happen.
That is true.
Hanako, thank you so much for coming and making time. Do you feel like we covered the topic pretty well? Do you feel like there's other angles that we haven't really gone into?
I think it was pretty. I think it was pretty extensive. Yeah.
Maybe actually I would like to ask what kind of advice you'd have for someone who wants to get into journalism here in Japan. Where do they start? Do you have to start overseas and be transferred here? Do you have to apply to local papers or the big papers? Or do you have to just do your own research, do your own documentaries and put them out there and see what happens?
Yeah, I think it's a tough one, because I think maybe 10, 15 years ago, the career path was much more clear. But because our media landscape is constantly changing and evolving, there's no real one path. Like, for example, with my career, I never knew that traditionally you had to be a reporter in the United States, make your way up from local television, then you go to national television. And then maybe once you were a reporter for some years, you got to be an international correspondent. You got flown overseas. I just went for that route immediately. So I would definitely encourage people who are interested in reporting about Japan to come to Japan to tell those stories, to pitch to different outlets and see how you can develop your career in that way. I don't think there's any one career path that you can take. And it really is sort of up to you. I think also a bit of luck is involved naturally with careers as well. But just to be really, really ambitious and to, again, tell stories that haven't been covered before, right? Because if you're new to this landscape, if you're new to this industry, you have to stand out in some way. And you have to figure out what that thing is that helps you stand out.
Find your story.
Find your story. Yes, exactly. Yes.
Hanako, thank you very much for making time. Thank you everyone for listening and watching. This was Unpacking Japan, and we'll be back again next week. Bye. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future conversations. And we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed this episode, here are a couple more that we think you'll enjoy. Thanks again for your support, and we'll see you next time.